What kind of mother gets barred from her own son's Thanksgiving table? The question hit me like a slap, raw and stinging, as I stood on the porch of my son's house, clutching a homemade pecan pie. The November air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, but it did nothing to cool the heat rising in my chest. I'd driven 3 hours across state lines, my car packed with gifts for my grandchildren, only to be met by Karen, my daughter-in-law, her face tight with that polite, unyielding smile. "I'm sorry, Ellen," she said, her voice clipped, "but we're keeping it small this year. Just immediate family." Immediate family. The words sliced through me, sharper than any knife in my kitchen. I was his mother. I'd raised David, bandaged his scraped knees, stayed up nights worrying when he was sick. And now, I wasn't family enough. I forced a smile, my grip tightening on the pie dish. "I understand." I lied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. Karen's eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or triumph, before she shut the door, leaving me staring at the wreath of autumn leaves mocking me from the other side. I stood there, frozen, the weight of rejection sinking in. My son hadn't even come to the door. Not a word, not a glance. The pie felt heavier in my hands, like it carried the sum of my humiliation. I turned back to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots, each step a reminder of the distance growing between me and the boy I'd raised. David, my only child, had always been my anchor. When his father left us, I poured everything into him. Every late shift at the diner, every sacrifice dream. I'd built a life for us, brick by brick, in our small Ohio town. And now, at 62, I was an outsider in his world, thanks to Karen. She'd never liked me. From a moment David brought her home 5 years ago, her polished manners and sharp eyes sized me up like I was a stain on her perfect life. Karen was all city gloss, expensive highlights, tailored coats, a job in marketing that made her talk like she was selling herself even at Sunday brunch. I was the opposite. Calloused hands, thrift store sweaters, a life spent scraping by. She'd smile through gritted teeth when I'd bring over casseroles or offer to babysit little Emma and Noah. "We've got it handled," she'd say, her tone implying I was meddling, not helping. I slid into my car, the pie now on the passenger seat, and stared at the house. The windows glowed with warmth, laughter spilling out faintly, the kind of joy I'd always imagined for my family. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I could drive home, tail between my legs, and spend Thanksgiving alone with a frozen turkey dinner. Or I could do something else, something that would show her, that I wasn't so easily erased. The idea sparked then, small but fierce, like a match in the dark. If Karen wanted to shut me out, fine. I'd host my own holiday dinner. Not just any dinner, a feast that would put her sterile, Pinterest-perfect table to shame. I'd fill my house with people who didn't need to be immediate to feel like family. I'd show David what he was missing, what he'd let slip away. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. The pie slid slightly on the seat, a reminder of what I'd come here to give. I wasn't going to let Karen's rejection define me. I'd spent too many years fighting for my place in this world to let her take it away. As I pulled onto the highway, the plan took shape in my mind. I'd invite the neighbors, the folks from the diner, the stragglers at church who had nowhere else to go. My table would overflow with food, laughter, and love. Everything Karen's exclusive little dinner lacked. By the time I got home, the spark had grown into a fire. My small house, with its chipped paint and creaky floors, would become a haven. I spent the next 2 days planning, my hands moving faster than my doubts. I called up Betty from the diner, who'd been eating alone since her husband passed. I texted Luis, the line cook, who always worked holidays to send money to his kids in Mexico. I even tracked down Mrs. Callahan, the widow down the street, who hadn't left her house since Easter. They all said yes, their voices bright with surprise and gratitude. The day before Thanksgiving, my kitchen was a whirlwind. I chopped onions, kneaded dough, and roasted a turkey that filled the house with a rich, savory aroma. My counters groaned under the weight of dishes, mashed potatoes with pools of melted butter, green bean casserole with crispy onions, cornbread stuffing studded with sausage. The pecan pie sat proudly on the sideboard, its crust golden and perfect. I didn't sleep that night, too wired with purpose, too alive with the thought of proving Karen wrong. Thanksgiving morning, my house buzzed with anticipation. I set the table with my mother's old lace tablecloth, mismatched plates, and mason jars for glasses. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. As the first guests arrived, their arms full of side dishes and bottles of cheap wine, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. Betty hugged me, her eyes misty. Luis brought his guitar, promising to play after dinner. Mrs. Callahan, frail but smiling, handed me a tin of homemade cookies. This was family, not the kind bound by blood or Karen's approval, but the kind forged by shared moments, shared struggles. As we sat down to eat, the table groaned under the weight of food and stories. Laughter filled the room, drowning out the ache in my heart. I glanced at the empty chair where David should have been, and for a moment the pain flared. But then Betty raised her glass, toasting to Ellen's stubborn heart, and the room erupted in cheers. I smiled, my eyes stinging, and thought, this is enough. For now it had to be. The clink of glasses and the hum of conversation carried me through the evening, but as the last guest left, the quiet settled like dust. My house felt too big, too empty, the echoes of laughter fading into the walls. I cleared the table, stacking plates in the sink, the remnants of my triumph, now just crumbs and greasy pans. I'd done it. I'd hosted a Thanksgiving that rivaled anything Karen could have planned. But the victory tasted hollow. David hadn't called, hadn't texted. Not even a happy Thanksgiving, Mom. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, willing it to light up with his name. It didn't. The next morning, I woke to a text from my neighbor, Jenny, who'd heard about my dinner. "Heard you threw a hell of a party," it read. "Wish I'd been there." I smiled, but the ache lingered. I needed to know why Karen had shut me out, why David had let her. I deserved answers, not just assumptions. I drove back to their house, unannounced, the 3-hour trip fueled by coffee and determination. This time, I wouldn't be turned away with a polite excuse. When I pulled into their driveway, the house looked picture-perfect as always. Karen's SUV gleamed, the lawn was manicured, and the porch swing swayed gently in the breeze. I knocked, my heart pounding, half expecting Karen to answer with that same icy smile. But it was David who opened the door, his face pale, his eyes tired. "Mom," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and something else. Guilt, maybe. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk," I said, stepping past him before he could protest. The living room was a mess of toys and leftover pie plates, a stark contrast to Karen's usual order. "Where's Karen?" "She's upstairs with the kids," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Mom, about yesterday. Why didn't you invite me?" I cut him off, my voice sharper than I meant. "I'm your mother, David. I drove all this way, and you couldn't even come to the door." He flinched, his eyes dropping to the floor. "It wasn't my call," he muttered. Karen thought it'd be better to keep things small." "Better for who?" I snapped. "You let her decide I'm not family." "It's not like that," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He looked older than his 35 years, lines creasing his forehead. "She's under a lot of stress, Mom. Work's been tough, and the kids. Don't make excuses for her," I said, my hands trembling. "You could have stood up for me." Before he could respond, Karen appeared at the top of the stairs, her arms crossed, her face a mask of controlled calm. "Ellen," she said, descending slowly, "I didn't expect you." Her tone was polite, but it carried an edge, like a blade wrapped in silk. "I bet you didn't," I said, meeting her gaze. "Care to explain why I wasn't welcome at my own son's table?" She sighed, glancing at David as if expecting him to intervene. He didn't. "It wasn't personal," she said, her voice measured. "We just needed a quiet holiday. You know how overwhelming family gatherings can be." "Overwhelming." I laughed, the sound bitter. "I raised David alone, Karen. I worked double shifts so he could have a future. And now I'm too much for your quiet little dinner." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. "You always make it about you," she said, her voice low but sharp. "This wasn't about excluding you. It was about what we needed as a family." The word family hit like a punch. I opened my mouth to fire back, but David stepped between us, his hands raised. "Enough," he said, his voice breaking. "Both of you, just stop." That's when the twist came, sharp and unexpected, like a crack in the foundation. David's eyes were wet, his shoulders slumped. "It's not just Karen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you here either, Mom." The room spun. My son, my David, had chosen her side. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I stared at him, searching for the boy who used to cling to me during thunderstorms, but all I saw was a man torn between two women, neither of whom he could fully face. "What?" I managed, my voice cracking. He hesitated, then said, "You're intense, Mom. You come in with all this energy, all these expectations. It's a lot sometimes." Karen nodded slightly, as if his words vindicated her. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand how he could betray me like this. But the hurt was too deep, rooting me to the spot. I'd spent my life giving him everything, and now I was too much. I turned and walked out, my vision blurring with tears. The drive home was a haze, the road stretching endlessly before me. David's words echoed in my head, each one a fresh wound. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, a resolve to understand, to fight for my place in his life, not with anger, but with truth. Karen might have won this round, but I wasn't done yet. I'd find a way to bridge this gap, even if it meant facing truths I wasn't ready for. The days after my confrontation with David blurred into a fog of hurt and restless energy. I scrubbed my kitchen counters until they gleamed, rearranged my living room furniture twice, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from spiraling. His words, "You're intense, Mom," clung to me like damp clothes, heavy and inescapable. I'd always seen my strength as a gift, the fire that kept us going when life tried to break us. But now I wondered if that fire had burned too brightly, scorching the people I loved most. I couldn't let it end like this. I needed to understand not just what David meant, but why Karen had drawn such a hard line. There was more to this than her usual coldness. I could feel it. So I did what any stubborn mother would do. I dug for answers. I started small, calling Jenny, who knew everyone's business in town. "Karen's been off lately," Jenny said over coffee at the diner. "Heard she's been fighting with David. Something about her job, maybe family stuff." Family stuff. The phrase gnawed at me. Karen's parents lived across the country, and she rarely mentioned them. Was that it? Was she projecting some old wound onto me? I needed more, so I turned to the one person who might know. Sarah, David's old high school friend, who still lived nearby and occasionally babysat for Emma and Noah. Over lunch, Sarah hesitated, then leaned in. "Karen's been stressed," she said. She told me once her mom was controlling. Always in her business, always judging. Maybe you remind her of that. The revelation hit like a spark in dry grass. Karen wasn't just shutting me out. She was fighting a ghost from her past, and I was caught in the crossfire. It didn't excuse her, but it gave me a thread to pull. I decided to confront her again, but this time, I'd be smarter. No accusations, no raised voices. I'd invite her to talk, mother to mother, and see if I could crack that polished exterior. I sent her a text, simple and neutral. "Karen, can we meet for coffee? Just us. I want to understand." To my surprise, she agreed, suggesting a cafe halfway between our homes. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting stiffly at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a latte. Her eyes were guarded, but there's something new in them, fatigue, maybe, or vulnerability. "Thanks for coming," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I don't want to fight. I just want to know why you feel I don't belong." She stared into her coffee, her fingers tightening on the mug. "It's not about you, Ellen," she said finally. "It's complicated." "Then explain it." I pressed, keeping my voice soft. "I'm not your enemy." She exhaled a shaky sound, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. My mom never gave me space, she said. She had an opinion on everything. My clothes, my career, my marriage. When I met David, I promised myself I'd build a family on my terms. And sometimes you feel like her. Her words stung, but they also clarified. I wasn't just fighting Karen's dislike. I was battling her history. I'm not trying to control you, I said. I just want to be part of David's life, the kids' lives. I want us to be family, not rivals. She looked up, her eyes searching mine. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. I'm trying to protect what we have. Protect it for me? I asked, my voice steady but aching. She didn't answer, but the silence said enough. We parted with a tentative promise to talk again, but as I drove home, I felt the weight of her confession. This wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It was about boundaries, fears, and two women who loved the same man in different ways. I didn't have all the answers, but I had a start. That night, I wrote David a letter, pouring out everything, my hurt, my love, my hope for a way forward. I didn't send it, not yet. I needed time to let it settle, to decide how to face the next battle. Because there would be one. Karen's walls were high, but they weren't unbreakable. And David? He was still my son, no matter how lost he seemed. I'd fight for him, for us, with every ounce of the intensity he thought was too much. But first, I needed a plan, one that would bring us together, not tear us further apart. Christmas was coming, and with it, a new chance to bridge the chasm between me and David's family. I'd spent weeks mulling over Karen's words at the cafe, turning them over like stones in a river, searching for the smooth truth beneath. She saw me as a threat, an echo of her controlling mother. But I wasn't her mother, and I wasn't trying to run her life. I just wanted to be part of it. The letter to David still sat unsent on my kitchen table, its pages worn from rereading. I decided it was time to act, not just write. I called David and asked if I could visit, not for a holiday, not for a grand gesture, just to see the kids. To my relief, he agreed, though his voice was cautious. Karen's okay with it, he said, but let's keep it low-key. Low-key. The word grated, but I swallowed my pride. This wasn't about me winning, it was about rebuilding. When I arrived, Emma and Noah ran to me, their small arms wrapping around my legs. "Grandma!" They squealed, and for a moment, the world felt right again. Karen lingered in the kitchen, watching us with a wary eye, but she didn't interfere. David, though, was quieter than usual, his smiles forced. We played with the kids in the backyard, building a snowman until our fingers were numb. It was simple, but it was a start. That evening, as the kids watched cartoons, I pulled David aside. "I'm sorry if I've been too much," I said, the words tasting like surrender. "I just miss you. All of you." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Mom. It's just things are tense. Karen's been dealing with a lot, and I'm trying to keep the peace." "By pushing me away?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. He didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. I left that night with a fragile hope, but also a growing resolve. Karen's fears weren't my burden to carry, but I could meet her halfway. I started small, sending her recipes I thought she'd like, texting pictures of the kids' old drawings I'd found in my attic. She responded sparingly, but she responded. It was progress. Then came the twist that shook me to my core. A week before Christmas, Sarah called, her voice tight with urgency. "Ellen, you need to know something. Karen's mom is coming to stay with them. For a month." The news hit like a freight train. Karen's mother, the woman whose shadow I'd been fighting, was stepping into the picture. If Karen thought I was controlling, how would she handle her own mother's presence? And what did this mean for me, for my place in David's life? I felt a surge of panic, but also a strange clarity. This was my chance, not to compete, but to show Karen I could be different, better. I invited them all to my house for Christmas Eve. Not a grand feast like Thanksgiving, but a quiet evening. Hot cocoa, cookies, a few gifts for the kids. I made it clear, Karen's mother was welcome too. I wanted no walls, no exclusions. To my shock, Karen agreed, though her text was curt, "We'll come." Mom too. Christmas Eve arrived, and my house was warm with the glow of fairy lights and the smell of cinnamon. When David, Karen, the kids, and Karen's mother, Linda, walked in, I braced myself. Linda was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a handshake like a business deal. She sized me up, much like Karen had years ago. But I smiled, offering her a mug of cocoa. "I'm glad you're here," I said, meaning it. The evening was tentative at first. Linda dominated the conversation, critiquing everything from my decor to the cookies. Karen was quiet, her eyes darting between her mother and me. David looked like he wanted to disappear. But then Emma spilled her cocoa, and in the chaos of cleaning it up, Linda laughed, a real unguarded laugh. It broke the ice, and soon we were all talking, even joking. For the first time, I saw Karen relax, her shoulders softening as she watched her kids open gifts. As they left, Karen lingered at the door. "Thanks, Ellen," she said, her voice low. This meant a lot. I nodded, my throat tight. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a crack in the wall. I'd faced Karen's past, her fears, and come out the other side. But I knew the real test was still coming. Linda's stay would stir things up, and I need to hold my ground without losing what I'd gained. Linda's presence in David and Karen's house was like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. I heard bits and pieces from Sarah. How Linda rearranged the kitchen, criticized Karen's parenting, even suggested David's job wasn't ambitious enough. Karen, who'd spent years building her perfect life, was unraveling under the weight of her mother's judgment. I recognized the irony. Karen had pushed me away for being too much, yet here she was drowning in the same kind of control she'd fled. Part of me wanted to gloat, to let her stew in her own choices. But the bigger part, the mother in me, sought a chance to change the story. I started visiting more, always with a purpose, dropping off cookies for the kids, helping David fix a leaky faucet, offering to take Emma and Noah to the park. I kept my energy soft, my presence light, nothing like the intense mother David had described. Karen noticed. She didn't say much, but her guarded look softened, and once she even asked me to stay for dinner. It was just pizza, nothing fancy, but sitting at their table, laughing with my grandkids, felt like a small victory. Linda, though, was another story. She'd watch me like a hawk, her comments laced with subtle barbs. "You must be so busy, Ellen, running that little diner life," she'd say, her smile tight. I'd smile back, refusing to take the bait. I wasn't here to fight her. I was here for my family. But the tension was building, a slow simmer that threatened to boil over. It did one icy January evening. I'd come over to drop off a scarf I'd knitted for Emma, but when I arrived, the house was a battlefield. Karen was yelling, her voice raw, something about Linda rearranging her office. Linda stood in the living room, arms crossed, unmoved. David was trying to mediate, his face drawn, while the kids hid upstairs. I should have left, but I couldn't. Not while my family was fracturing. "Karen," I said, stepping into the chaos, "let's take a walk. Just you and me." She froze, her eyes wild, but something in my voice, calm, steady, made her nod. We stepped outside, the cold biting our faces, and walked in silence for a block. Finally, she spoke. "I can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "She's suffocating me, Ellen, just like she always has." I listened as she poured it all out. Years of her mother's control, her need to prove herself, her fear of losing the life she'd built. I saw myself in her story, not as the villain, but as another woman trying to hold her ground. "I get it," I said. "I've been too much sometimes, too. But you don't have to fight alone." She looked at me, tears in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw trust. Not full, not yet, but a flicker. We went back to the house, and I faced Linda. "You're hurting her," I said, my voice firm but not cruel. "She's not your little girl anymore. Let her breathe." Linda bristled, but David stepped in, his voice quiet but resolute. "Mom's right," he said, looking at Linda. "You need to back off." The room went still. Linda's face hardened, but she didn't argue. She left the next day, cutting her visit short. Karen didn't thank me. Not directly, but when she hugged me goodbye, her arms lingered a second longer than before. The victory was bittersweet. I'd helped Karen, but I'd also seen how fragile my son's family was. David and I talked that night, really talked for the first time in months. He admitted he'd been avoiding conflict, letting Karen and Linda call the shots to keep the peace. "I should have stood up for you," he said, his eyes heavy with regret. "I'm sorry, Mom." I hugged him, my heart full and breaking at once. We weren't whole yet, but we were closer. The walls were coming down, not just between me and Karen, but between all of us. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Families never are. But I'd keep showing up, keep fighting, not with anger, but with love. With Linda gone, the air in David's house felt lighter, but the cracks remained. Karen was quieter, her confidence shaken. David was trying harder, inviting me over for Sunday dinners, but I could sense the strain between them. I kept my visits short, my presence gentle, like tending a bruised garden. I didn't want to push too hard, but I also couldn't let go of the progress we'd made. I started inviting them to my place too, small gatherings with just us and the kids. Emma and Noah loved my backyard, chasing fireflies while we adults sat on the porch, talking about nothing and everything. One evening, as we watched the kids play, Karen surprised me. "You were right about my mom," she said, her voice low. I didn't see how much I was letting her control me. "I'm sorry for how I treated you." Her apology caught me off guard, a fragile gift I hadn't expected. "We're learning," I said, smiling. "All of us." She nodded, and for the first time, I felt like we were on the same side. But life doesn't tie up neatly, and the next challenge came swiftly. David got a job offer in Chicago, a big step up from his current role. It meant moving, uprooting the kids, leaving me behind. When he told me, his voice was excited but nervous, like he was waiting for my reaction. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay. 3 hours was one thing. Chicago was a different world. But I saw the spark in his eyes, the kind I hadn't seen since he was a kid with big dreams. "Take it," I said, my voice steady despite the ache. "You deserve this." Karen, though, was less certain. "It's a lot," she admitted over coffee the next day. "The kids, my job, leaving everything familiar, I don't know if I can do it." I saw my chance, not to hold them back, but to help them forward. "You're stronger than you think," I told her. "You build a good life here. You can build another one there. And I'll visit. I'm not going anywhere." She smiled, a real smile, and I felt the last of her walls crumble. The move was set for spring, and I threw myself into helping them prepare. I babysat while they packed, cooked freezer meals for their first weeks in Chicago, even helped Karen sort through her office, laughing over old photos of David in his awkward teen years. But as the moving date approached, my heart grew heavy. I'd fought so hard to reclaim my place in their lives, and now they were leaving. The night before they left, we had one last dinner at my house. The table was set with the same lace tablecloth from Thanksgiving, but this time, David, Karen, and the kids filled the chairs. We laughed, told stories, and when Emma climbed into my lap, I held her tight, memorizing the weight of her small body. As they drove away the next morning, I stood on my porch, waving until their car disappeared. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the love we'd rebuilt, the trust we'd earned. I'd lost them for a while, but I'd found them again, not by forcing my way in, but by opening my heart wider than I thought possible. Chicago was a world away, but I didn't let the distance define us. I visited every few months, piling into my old car with gifts and stories for Emma and Noah. Their new apartment was small but bright, filled with Karen's touches. Modern art, sleek furniture, but also a few of my old recipes taped to the fridge. David's job was demanding, but he glowed with purpose. Karen was finding her footing too, balancing work and motherhood with a quiet strength I hadn't seen before. Our relationship wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old habits that flared, my tendency to offer advice unasked, Karen's instinct to pull back. But we talked through it, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with laughter. We were learning to be a family, not just in name, but in the messy, beautiful reality of it. One summer, they came back to Ohio for a visit. We hosted a barbecue in my backyard, inviting Betty, Luis, and Mrs. Callahan, the same crew from that first Thanksgiving. The kids ran wild, David manned the grill, and Karen helped me set out platters of food. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the scene, I looked at my family, not just the ones bound by blood, but the ones I'd chosen, the ones who'd chosen me back. Karen caught my eye and raised her glass. "To Ellen," she said, her voice steady, "for never giving up." The cheers that followed warmed me more than the summer sun. I'd started this journey rejected, standing alone on a porch with a pie in my hands. But I'd built something better, not just a dinner, but a life full of people who mattered. David hugged me later, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Mom." And in that moment, I knew I'd done more than host a meal. I'd shown all of them, that love doesn't demand a seat at the table. It builds one. As I cleaned up that night, the stars bright overhead, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Family wasn't about perfection or control. It was about showing up again and again, even when it hurt. I'd faced rejection, doubt, and my own flaws, and I'd come out stronger. So had they. And that was enough.